Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander Eth, and today we are esoterically elated to be chatting about the Living Tarot with T. Susan Chang. Now, I know many listeners, you are very familiar with Susie and her incredible work. She is a certified professional tarot reader with decades of experience. She's an author of many books. She's co-host of the Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast. And her books include, by the way, as I know many listeners are familiar with, Tarot Correspondences, Ancient Secrets for Everyday Readers. And Susie also has a degree in classics from Harvard. As you've heard in previous Glitch Bottle episodes with Jack Grail, she can read and recite ancient Greek, which is just so wonderful, and so much more. And so definitely check out that episode with Susie and Jack Grail if you have not already. But today, Susie's joining us to talk about her latest tome, which is The Living Tarot. And it's fantastic on so many levels because Susie's amazing because she addresses all the questions that are bouncing around in someone's head. Like, I know some of the classic correspondences, but can I come up with my own correspondences? Is that even allowed? Is it okay? What are the ethics behind the cards and everything else? So with all of that being said, T. Susan Chang, thank you so much for stopping on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I love coming on the show with you. I love Glitch Bottle generally. I mean, who else is going to obsess over whether we're pronouncing the nomine magica right? You know, it's I love your show and I love what you do. And I appreciate the invitation.
Oh my goodness. Well, the honor and pleasure is certainly mine, Susie. And I think I echo, I try not to speak for the listeners, but I think I would join them in the resounding endorsement, not only of your previous books, but okay, The Living Tarot, like this book, I'll just say this on the outset, this will be a theme. It's challenged me to break out of misconceptions that I had. It challenged me to actually journal and actually keep track of things about meaning. And so we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, Susie, I suppose the most logical question is, what was the genesis of this book? I mean, you've already written, you have so much experience with tarot. What was this specific book about?
Yeah, so I guess the genesis of the Living Tarot was it was probably a few years back because I had really gone on numerous deep dives into numerous wormholes into the correspondences and and the stuff that some of us like, some of us enjoy, the Hermetic Kabbalah and numbers and astrology and all of that, but not everybody does. And I feel like although the correspondences were something I desperately wanted to know, I felt we needed a 777 for tarot. I didn't want that to be it. I didn't want that to be the only way in because, there's a very particular kind of person who loves systems and God bless us, the world needs us, but not everyone is like us. And I believe that tarot should be for everyone. And, for the astrology people out there, I am a Virgo sun, which explains all the correspondences stuff, but I am also a Pisces rising. And I believe that everybody needs to be able to have their own search for meaning available to them. So, and it all came about pretty naturally because I wanted so badly to teach people about tarot. And I didn't know how to do it. And I was like, obviously, I can't be trying to teach people about the 22 paths and the 10 Sephirot and, and the 4 worlds. I mean, who's gonna, So when I first tried starting to teach tarot, I was literally I had 5 people in my house and I was like, well, here's some things you can do. And I kept trying to figure out ways to show people what was so great about tarot. And what I began to realize over time, and this was very humbling, was that it may not be possible to teach anyone tarot, actually, but I believe that you can teach people to teach themselves because tarot is personal. It's just like magic. You have to figure it out for yourself.
Yes. And you turned this on my head completely, Susie, because I'm so used to exactly coming from that kind of ceremonial, grimoire, Solomonic, traditional path. And then I have friends who are in, the Golden Dawn and the OTO.
Yeah.
And so these kind of received 1890s post-Victorian, early modern era correspondences, which are great and fantastic.
Which are great.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you have this beautiful, you take this received knowledge and this kind of receptivity from an external source, and you flip it on its head, which is just so rejuvenating. So can you talk about how or why is it so important when it comes to this relationship with meaning to derive it from your actual daily direct experience?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I believe that, that tarot is just a microcosm of everything in the world. It's another language for describing the world. I'm thinking of like the guy, the Brazilian soccer player in Ted Lasso who goes around shouting, "Football is life. Tarot is life," right? It's everything. It's everything. And, very often people kind of treat tarot like it's a scripture or or a Bible or something like that. And that's fine. That's great. But if you can't see your entire life in the cards, what does a reading mean then? How are you going to translate what you see into something that's actually applicable to your life if you can't recognize your own life in the cards? So, so to me, learning tarot is the process of discovering everything in the world, but in the cards. And once you have everything in the world that you can hold in your hands, then you can externalize it. You can play with it. You have like the tools of the universe in your hands. So I think it's this incredibly powerful tool, but it's going to look different for every single person. And that's why there is no replacement for just figuring out what it looks like in your life, your special, particular, unique, individual, perfect life that you are the expert on and nobody else.
That is so great, because it challenged me so much when I was going through this book, which we should talk about this too. The structure of your book is a self-guided workbook almost, where there are exercises. You can take copious notes. You give excellent lucid instructions, and you have people take maybe a week or 2 weeks, depending on it is, to go through each of the sections. Why did you structure the book, the Living Tarot, in this kind of way?
Yeah, well, it actually grew out of the online course that I do, which is also called the Living Tarot. And I kind of created in these 8 sections because I wanted to, sort of take people from just getting their toes wet, card of the day, which I believe is a fundamental practice. It's like, daily prayers, or like brushing your teeth. And I thought we'll start with that. And then we're going to do this huge, like massive build out of correspondences between your life and the cards. We're going to do that. And it's going to take a few weeks. And, in the course, in the online course, people may take months, which is fine, which is great, and then after we get this massive like database of information about what tarot actually means to us, then we can start taking it for a spin. And so we have to, like, after that, I sort of ask the big questions, like, who are we talking to when we work with tarot? Is it about the future? Is it just for insight? Is it just for advice? Those kinds of big questions. We get through those two. And then halfway through the book, halfway through the course, we finally get to ask a question. Which, I don't blame anybody who just wants to like skip to the middle of the book and start asking questions, because that you're not gonna wait 4 months to find out that thing about your crush, So, but then once we actually start asking questions, I really want people to get a sense of like, here's how we ask questions that we can actually get answers to in tarot. Here's how we can sort of focus a reading so we don't get overwhelmed by information. And then we practice on like fake questions. We practice on little stories and word problems like in math, only I made them all with like first names from members of the Golden Dawn. So there's like a reading for Alistair and a reading for Pam and a reading for McGregor. And since they're not real, nobody can get hurt. Maybe, that maybe the ghosts have their feelings hurt, but everyone gets a chance to like practice on these made up situations. And then if you want, you can take it for a spin with your actual family and friends. And, and by like chapter 7 or so, you should be reading pretty fluently for yourself and or other people if you want to. I kind of go through by chapters 7 and 8. I started talking about like, what are the rituals around the praxis? What do you have to be aware of? What kind of legal things should you know, which everybody hates to think about, but you should. And then finally, by chapter 8 is the magic chapter. That is the other side of divination. And it is not the main point of this book, but I think that everything in the book leads up to it.
Yes, I have to echo that, because you really provide this, like, for the first few chapters, this kind of base of the pyramid structure where everything builds on the previous lesson, which I love. My Capricorn brain just loves that kind of Saturnine sense of order. But in addition, Susie, what is so amazing and refreshing is you really encourage readers to lean into not only their own idiosyncrasies when they're reading the cards, but also, as you say, their own, as you say, this relationship with meaning in their own lives. And one of the things do, you challenge people to really take a look at whether it's, the major arcana, the minor arcana, and really find out what you think about the cards. So, for example, one of the exercises, my scrawled version.
Oh, look at you. That's so great.
One of the exercises is, and I love this, is you say, all right, well, there are these kind of, usually positive association cards, and then ones that are more associative negative, but you flip it on its head. And so with the sun card, for example, you say, look at the card, write down what are some of the potential negatives that you might find in a card. Like, what if light is too blinding for the sun? Or, I was writing
What if
down,
you get dehydrated?
What if you get dehydrated? How many shadows is this casting on the ground? Like things like that. And so can you just talk about how you first really said, I really want readers to look at those cards that they've seen for years and years and years and come up with fresh meaning and this kind of deep capacity for metaphor that you talk about?
Wow. That's such a good question. I mean, I think one of the things that frustrated me so much about tarot in the beginning was the idea that the only meanings there were in this little tiny book. And I was like, that is not true. That cannot be true, because how am I going to extrapolate from these 5 words something that's useful for my life? So every card was like putting on a too small sweater that didn't fit. And you kind of like stretching and groaning and trying to pull it over your head. And the other side of that, of course, is that because people only thought that what the meanings were those that were in the book, you would see people who would get a scary looking card like the 10 of Swords, and they would ruin their day or their week or their month or their life, because they would take it literally. Right. And I thought that cannot be it. That cannot be it. So, I truly believe that every card is 1/78th at least, like all of life. And to be 1/78th of everything is practically infinite itself. Every card has a huge range of expression. Every card has meanings upon meanings. And while, every card has a lot of meanings, not every card can mean everything. So like the example I often give is like the emperor is never going to be like a trio of cute kittens with pink ribbons tied around them, right? But every card has a vast range of expression, and there is there is light and shadow in every single card. There is potential in every single card. So I felt that it was time to figure out the true extent of the application of the cards. And that is why I encourage people, I insist that people keep track of what they draw, because even if your imagination is not sufficient to crack open the shell of that card, true life will tell you what it means. The card will tell you itself what it means if you just live with it. And if you draw one card a day, every single day, you will get all of them in like 9 months, right? Or if you draw two, you'll get them in like 5 or 6 months. It is, every single card is your friend, and every single card has something to offer. And the more you talk to them, the more you get to talk back, frankly, and argue and converse. And, it is truly a dialogue, I think. And that's one of the things that I think is missing.
Absolutely, because I wasn't reading your book. One of the thoughts that came up a lot is, gosh, in previous decks or years past, I just wasn't letting the cards breathe. I wasn't giving the cards room to have that interaction. And so that was just journaling and kind of going through your book. It really was challenging in the best way possible, because it was breaking down. It's kind of like waves on a dry sandcastle, slowly merging it.
Yeah.
And Susie, and of course, listeners, check out the podcast and video descriptions to pick up your own copy of the Living Tarot. But Susie, can you give us the broad strokes about, because one of the ways that I think this personal conversation happens is in tarot backwards and tarot forwards. Can you just give us the broad strokes about what those are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just started thinking about, actually, I thought of a new way to explain this yesterday because I was, I'm teaching this course for Atlas Obscura, and I was thinking about what the wonderful tarot reader, the late departed quantum physicist Yoav Ben-Dov used to say about the cards. He was a Tarot de Marseille specialist, but he talked about like learning by the image and learning by the table in tarot, which is something the Marseille readers use a lot, those terms. And learning by the image is like, looking at the image and seeing where the person's looking, or, how they have a funny hat on, or how one of their shoes is different, and just seeing the idiosyncratic things in the cards that make it unique. And learning by the table is like, saying, okay, well, all sevens must mean this particularly thing, and all wands mean this particular thing. So if you take a 7 and a wand and you put them together in this big table, this is what it has to mean. It has to have something to do, all sevens in my book are skills and seeking, and all wands are ambitions and drives. So the 7 of Wands must be about skills and seekings in the, in the realm of ambitions and drives. It's like math, so that's reading by the table. So tarot backwards and tarot forwards are kind of like tarot by image and tarot by the table. Tarot backwards is like looking around you and saying, okay, every single thing around me, everything that's happening could be a tarot card. Which one is it? So, rather than trying to just stare at the card and say, oh gosh, I see a person sitting under a tree. What could that possibly mean? I'm going to look around at everything and see what could possibly, it's like taking all the knowledge and putting it in the card catalog, as opposed to like starting from the card alone. So, you and I having a conversation, to me, that could be one of the, there's two of us. It could be like a 2 of Pentacles type thing. Right. I have a long history of that card, meaning, conversations between people. So that could be it. Could be the 8 of Wands, because that's a card where ideas are flying through the air. It's not going to be the same for every single person. But as long as there is a reason that makes sense to you, that you will always think of every time this thing, having conversations, happens, which hopefully happens a lot, then that will be your card for that. Or one of them. Same thing with like, anything that you do during the day. If you are sitting here, like speaking of the 4 of Cups, which is that guy who's sitting under the tree, with the cup he's not looking at. This is also me, because, very often I will be so interested in talking to whoever it is on Zoom that I ignore my my cup for the entire time, and it just sits there getting cold. So, I think that what I want people to see is that every minute of every day they are living in a poem, and that tarot is illustrating that in a way that brings meaning and beauty to life. So, these are exercises that I myself do all the time. Tarot backwards, like you're sitting in the line at the supermarket, and it's taking forever. I feel like the Seven of Pentacles, right? So, every single thing that you do can look like tarot. So that's tarot backwards, trying to figure out which things in everyday life, in a very sort of like a visual, colorful, descriptive way, fit with those cards. And now tarot forwards is about developing your own correspondence systems. So, I make people actually sit down and take all of the aces out and say, what do these have in common? Take all of the fives out. What do these have in common? And come up with a keyword. So that's developing the grid basically for their own correspondences. And then you take all of the suits and you say, okay, what are these suits about? I force people to like distill it down to a single phrase or sentence or like couple words, which is hard to do, and then use that. So now you do the math. Like you take the suit keyword, you take the number keyword, you put them together, and you derive the card keyword, right? So it's basically kind of doing this combinatorial game over and over again until you can understand, where these meanings are coming from because you made them. It's not something somebody handed down to you in a book anymore.
Yes, in fact, as you just said, you're coming up with your own keywords and phrases and your own structure that you can then apply. And here's what another thing I love about your book is, as I was going through this, I started a journal. I started to make these, connections, kind of neural cross-pollination. And then I started wondering, well, gosh, am I even asking the right questions? And lo and behold, you have a section in your book on this. And you say it's excellent because it's almost like you can anticipate what the reader's going to be asking. And so why is this so important, and what are some of the right questions? Why is it so important to even just know that, hey, you may have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not asking the right question, it can be pretty difficult.
Yeah. I think it's really important to ask the right question, and it's really important to prepare yourself for the answer as well. I think, asking the right question is really hard because it comes down to examining some of our assumptions about what's going on in divination. Who the hell are you talking to, right? And when you say, what should I do, tarot? Well, who's the person who usually tells you what you should do? Your wife, your husband, your kids, your boss, your God. For God's sake, just have one place in your life where nobody is telling you what to do except yourself. So, one of the things that I really want people to do before they even start asking questions, and that's part of this whole process, is to examine, who it is that you think you're calling. Who you're going to call is the name of the exercise. Who is it that you think you're calling? And, for everyone, it's going to be different. I kind of encourage people to create a composite, a composite spirit of the tarot. Of course, if you're in the OTO or, in Golden Dawn, it's going to be the angel shrew. I think people should kind of make up their own angel shrew, their own understanding, right, of the tarot angel. And it can be a combination of your best impulses in yourself, your best friends, your ancestors, people you don't know who you admire, like the Dalai Lama, Galadriel, fictional people, whatever it is, a combination of these forces for good in your life to help you answer those questions about what would be best to do. And what I generally do is, because, I think that should puts us in such a moralistic frame of mind when we ask, what should I do? I generally suggest that people just cross should out altogether, and ask the question in a way that is less baggagey, less loaded, So I kind of think that many questions sort of fall into the category of either, predictive questions or insight-based questions. And I offer both options to people. Most people are going to end up doing a bit of both. Some will only do prediction, some will only do insight. But I think that, like, in place of asking the question, what should I do? It's helpful to kind of think in a predictive mentality and say, what would happen if, what would happen if I did this? And because that doesn't force you to act in a particular way. It just gives you information for you to work with. And I think, at its best, tarot is like that. It gives you critical information, like a map. And the map, of course, I liked this metaphor better when we didn't have GPS, but a map does not tell you what to do. GPS kind of does, but a map does not tell you what to do. It just tells you the information and you figure out for yourself where you're going. So that's part of it. That's part of asking the right question. And the other part of it that I think is really important is knowing how to receive an answer, because, one of the things I teach people to do is what I call priming the pump, which is when you come up with a question finally, and you want to know what the answer is, I tell people, okay, think of like 5 possible answers to that question, and tell me what tarot card each of those are. Because if you can't come up with a tarot card for each of those answers, how are you possibly going to read whatever tarot gives you, right? So if you've been through this process of building up your language in tarot and understanding what it's trying to tell you in very mundane, ordinary ways, you have a much better chance of getting that answer right when you do your random draw. And for whatever reason, forcing yourself to look at these cards and come up, with what your answers might look like, for whatever reason, that exercise seems to just like kickstart the pattern recognition process in the brain. And so when you shuffle the cards and get your answer, suddenly it kind of makes sense. Like, where did that come from? So that's, I think that's a part that I really try to do myself as well. I practice it with people I'm reading for all the time. They ask me a question which I'm not sure I can answer. And I think, okay, well, what would this look like in tarot? And if I can't see it, then I reframe the question, right? That's a really good thing to do whenever you're asking the question. Just ask yourself, do I know what the answer would look like? And if I know what the answer would look like, could I handle it? Right? And if the answers to either of those is no, then back up a scritch,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's exactly it. And I think, I know for me, and I'm sure for the listeners, I mean, hearing you say that, right? Someone with your years of erudition and expertise saying, hey, sometimes I'll be, dealing with a specific spread or a specific reading, and I have to kind of reframe. I think that's so refreshing, because it really, and tell me if this is fair, Susie, because when reading your book, it's like some people approach, the tarot, as you say, more like architects, right? Where here's how it is. This is like reading a master gardener's book. Like, this is someone who's like really encouraging you to empower yourself and see where things go. I don't know. Is that somewhat fair?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing about tarot is that, if you love tarot, this is not work, right? This is just what you want to think about all day long, and you might as well make it work for you, right? And if you don't want to work at it, or if you don't want to think about it, then, you're probably, what you put in is what you get out. With tarot, as with so many things, right? You will get answers, but if you really want to use tarot in a way that's going to break open your life and give you power and agency, then you got to be willing to make it your everything.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you do in the book, which is equally very refreshing, is you really take a look at some of the traditional layouts and spreads that people have. I mean, I've seen them. I'm sure you have as well. Online, for instance, right? There's like spread wars,
there's a gazillion.
Right? There's a gazillion, and this one is so much better than others, and you need to do this and you need to do that. And so you mentioned, Susie, the Celtic cross, for example, and and you talk about the Celtic cross, and then you kind of share about 2 and 3 card spreads. So can you, for those who might not be too familiar, what is the Celtic cross? And then conversely, what do you recommend for spreads and the number and how they're laid out?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Celtic cross you will find in practically any like little white book that comes with the deck. And, it's a hoary old spread, and there's a lot that it offers. I mean, it is like 10 cards, and there's something about it that is very kind of mystical and enchanting, and it feels like you're doing, old magic when you're doing it, because you're going, what covers you, what crosses you, what comes before, what comes after. All of this is great, but it gives you a shitload of information. It gives you 10 cards worth. And if you don't even know what one card means, how the hell are you supposed to, read 10 of them? So, I admire people who use the Celtic cross. I think it's great, but, honestly, the components of the Celtic cross usually have everything that you want to read about and you can just kind of break it into the pieces you want to know. Like, the middle of the cross is just the past, present, future, right? So very often you can just use the past, present, future, or you can like take pieces of it, like the, what covers you, what crosses you, the issue versus the conflict, right? You can do that. You can do, so I actually am a huge believer in just kind of going straight for the question, the two or three cards, and trying to answer it as directly as possible, partly for the sake of time also, because if you read a 10 card spread, you will be there for an hour, easily trying to get into the psychology of the thing. And, and that has its place, I think. But I would rather just concentrate really hard on 2 cards and be honest about what the answers are. Now, the other thing about drawing a whole ton of cards is that it gives you a lot of wiggle room, so you can, especially if you haven't primed the pump and if you haven't been very clear about what you're trying to get out of the question, you can make that 10 card spread mean just about anything, right? And that is not the point here. That is a great exercise creatively, and it's good for stretching your brain. But if you want information, that's not how we're going to do it. So I encourage people to use 2 and 3 card spreads just to get at what they want to know more directly. And honestly, if you do, like, basically you take your Celtic cross and you do 3 cards and then 2 cards and then 2 cards and then 2 cards, you've got your Celtic cross, right? It's just that you've taken it you've absorbed it in a way that is more bioavailable, I guess is the way I'd put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just breaking things down into more manageable chunks and just realizing that, at least for me, after going through your book, I said, gosh, when I was doing some of these larger spreads, it's almost like sitting under a waterfall and just being just doused in this information. And so I just love that, because what you do with the book is you really encourage and empower people on the front end to kind of, hey, take your time, formulate the question, develop your own meanings, tarot forwards, and then you talk about, the spreads and maybe just being more efficient or just having fewer cards, but you're going right to the heart of the matter.
Exactly. You go right to the heart of the matter, and take your time interpreting it. You can leave that spread out till tomorrow or the next day. You can, take it seriously. I think there's something about forcing yourself to have just a couple cards that makes it like higher stakes in a way, because you don't have like a way out, right? It's sort of like if it shows that person you have a crush on just, is not that into you, if you have 5 cards, you might be able to kind of massage that into a more hopeful message. But one card,
Right, exactly. Just cultivating whatever shape your tarot garden looks is exactly, it's gonna work for you. And I think that is so lovely, Susie. And Susie, as you can imagine, we have so many listener questions for you because I think the listeners were just as excited as I was. And so why don't we get into some of these? Because I think you'd really like this. All right. So our first listener question is from the wonderful, the amazing esoteric artist and esotericist Coleman Stevenson. And
Coleman, hello.
Yes. Hello, Coleman. And Coleman is asking and saying, hi, Alex. Hi, Susie. I would love to hear your thoughts, Susie, on the ethics of intuitive tarot reading. If you're going off book because your intuition is pulling in associations from the imagery or other information that isn't immediately connected to the traditional card meanings, how do you feel about incorporating that into a reading, especially for a client?
That is such a great question. You know, it's funny. I was just at the International Divination event in Dallas last week, and Mary Greer started a conversation with a few of us about that very subject. And Mary Greer is like the grande dame of tarot these days, and I mean for the last several decades. And so we were thinking about it, and I was thinking, I think it's completely valid to use your intuition, right? Even if you are getting things that aren't even anywhere near what you see on the card. I think that there are psychics who are doing a reading and they're not even looking at the cards. I mean, the cards are just there kind of as I don't want to say a prop, but just to get the juices flowing, I mean, it's not even about the cards. So, I do think there is a difference, though, between intuition, empathic intuition and projection. And I think that, the more I do this work and the longer I've done it, I can really tell the difference, and I think that people can if they're being honest with themselves. I mean, I think there's a feeling in your body that's just different. When you are trying to convince yourself of something, or when you are lecturing somebody, or, you have a sense of what they should do as opposed to what the cards are saying, that's a particular feeling in your body. And it's a kind of anxious feeling, So there's that. And then there's the feeling of intuition and empathy is quite different. It's almost like, if you imagine electric charge going in a negative direction versus a positive direction, in your body, it just feels differently. Like you feel like there's something passing through you. You don't feel like you're all that involved in it. You feel you care, but the information is not really coming from just here, right? Or just here. So one of the things I have people do right in the beginning is try to understand the difference between, I call it the psychic buzz exercise, between things that are coming from, from a place of empathy and things that are coming from a place of judgment, right? And I think that I think that that's fundamental for tarot readers. And so, it's something that's harder to get used to. But I think the more honest you are with yourself and the longer you work with the cards to get true messages and try to understand their breadth, the more likely it is you'll get honest answers. Like if you are seeing the judgment card and every single time it's about some, judgy coworker who is judging you, then that probably says more about you than it does about, the judgment card. So So, I think the process of opening up meaning in the cards expands the possibility of what we are able to read. And, in the process of reading for someone, I kind of believe that we can only read what we ourselves can perceive, and if our life is very small and our perceptions are very small, that's what we're going to see in the cards. So, so we try to expand our view, as much as possible and to accommodate people who are not like us. And that day that you find that you are saying something in the cards from their point of view that totally goes against what you actually think, then you've crossed a line. I mean, you've crossed into true tarot reader territory. So, so yes, I'm a believer in intuition as long as we recognize the difference between intuition and projection.
Absolutely. And again, just as you were touching on, Susie, to follow Coleman's question, there's a whole section on the ethics of tarot and just how you should approach that, which I know listeners will really appreciate. And, as you were just saying, it's about developing that relationship, your own idiosyncratic meaning, things that kind of like ripples that emanate from a pond. Where you are is how you'll derive the meaning. And this leads, I think, to another great listener question for you. And this is from Glitch Bottle patron Ash, who is asking and saying, yay, I could listen to Susie speak Greek all day. Ash, totally with you. Stay tuned for the after show here on Glitch Bottle. And so Ash is saying, my questions are, Susie, does your deck have a personality? Do you recall a reading when your tarot deck got cheeky with you? For example, Ash says, one time I told a friend that I never pull pages for myself. And the following tarot reading, Ash says, I had 3 pages. I've noticed that my divination tools have their own sense of humor, Ash says.
This is a really fascinating question. When I read that question, because you were nice enough to send me the questions beforehand, I started writing all over it because I thought, wow, this raises so many different interesting issues. Like, we tend to personify tarot, right? We give tarot a personality. And I think, I think that speaks to the human capacity for forming relationships, and for being in connection with other sentient beings, which is a plus. But I also think that it says something about reality in the sense that, happy people tend to live in a happy world, in a world they perceive as, happy and kind. And angry people tend to live in an angry world. And people who are funny tend to live in a funny world. So, I think there's something funny about Ash that, his deck has a sense of humor, right? There's something about you that is reflected in the world outside. And, your own sense of humor is, I want to say, reflected back to you, but not exactly, reflection's not exactly the word. I mean, when I was thinking about it, it seems to me that tarot is a mirror, but in the same way that the whole world is a mirror of you, right? It's not literally just your own thoughts bouncing back at you. It is, it is the whole world, but seen through your own lens, seen through your point of view, seen through everything or could know. So it's, that's why I like to think of the person on the other end on tarot as what the Jungians would call the self with a big S, which is everything, right? The part of us that's not limited to the individual. So yeah, I think, yes, decks have personalities. I mean, in a more sort of specific way, I think, the imagery can trigger different parts of our own personality, and then we see that reflected in the way that the deck talks to us as well. So yes, it's decks have personalities, and so do you, and that is not a coincidence.
Absolutely. So if a deck gets cheeky with you, as Ash was saying, perhaps, like you say, there's that reciprocal relationship that says something about the deck, something perhaps about you, something about the interaction, the client.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that all the time because, I think about Jung's definition of synchronicity as being meaningful coincidence. That's an easy definition, but it's only meaningful if there's an observer, right? Right. So meaning comes, I don't think meaning comes alone from us. And I don't think meaning exists unobserved in the environment. I think it's meaning is a relationship, right? It arises between the observer and the observed. And which one you are isn't necessarily always the observer, right? You aren't always the cosmic eye, but that's that's another story.
Yeah. No, that is very true. It reminds me of that Nietzsche quote, right? If you stare long enough into the abyss, if you stare long enough into the tarot deck will stare into you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Susie, to your point about relationships, I mean, this actually leads to the next listener question we have for you, because you were sharing earlier and saying people should ask the question, who is it doing the responding, and what are these relationships? And to that point, we have a question for you from patron Jorge Rivera, and Jorge is asking and saying, greetings to you, Alex, and to your guest, Susan. My question for Susie on the tarot would be, where does she consider the source to be of the information coming through the tarot? In the Caribbean, Jorge says, many consider that it's spirits of the dead that source the information that manifests on the cards or on the layout of the cards. And Jorge says, I would like to know what Susie thinks.
That is so great. I mean, so I have this whole questionnaire in the Who You Gonna Call section on page 114. And, it's basically think about your parents, think about the real life people, think about the ones you don't know, think about the dead, think about, and in Jorge's case, definitely it would be, I expect to hear from the spirits of the dead, right? That is who I'm looking for advice. And that is great, because if that's a framework that is in your bones, by all means, you should use it. It's not going to be the case for everybody, though. And we don't want to be like, well, hey, you don't have an ancestor tradition and you're not initiated, so you're not going to get any information from the tarot. No, right? We have to connect with our own spirit, our own felt sense of who is in charge. And as I say, I like to think of it as the self, as a capital S, because I don't come out of an initiatory tradition. I don't come out of a religion or anything like that. And I find that there is a wiser best self out there, probably similar to what our friends in Thelema would call the holy guardian angel, right? And that's what we're trying to connect with.
Yes, that goes right to your point and Jorge's point about receptivity, about understanding where you're at as you engage with the cards, and then as it feeds into the other tributaries of your background, your tradition, the initiatory aspects, your own day-to-day life. I absolutely love that. And to this question, also, we have for you, Susie, because you're so busy. I don't know how you sleep. And we'll get into that a little bit later, talking about your projects and your courses. But we have a question for you from Sorcerer's Homie, which I love that name, by the way.
Great name.
I know. A lot of the patrons have these amazing. I'm like, wow, that's
why
so
didn't
great.
I think of that?
I know. Can I go back to 1996 with AOL screen names and type that in? That would be great. And Sorcerer's Homie is asking and saying, to Miss Chang, have you considered releasing your own tarot deck someday? Thank you for everything you've contributed to this community.
That's so sweet.
Yeah.
I think about it all the time. I think about it all the time. Back in 2017, I want to say, I actually made this very silly little deck that was just for myself and a friend that was we were both really into Cole Porter lyrics. So there are 2 copies of the Cole Porter lyric tarot decks somewhere in existence. But no, more seriously, I think about it all the time, but I sort of feel like I want to make it myself. I mean, I've definitely talked to other deck creators, and I definitely have sort of many conversations in the works, but I would love to be able to draw. And, and it's not that I absolutely have zero affinity for drawing. I have some affinity for drawing, but I have never, ever put anything into it. And I sort of feel like I have to work on that. And, and maybe someday I'll get to the point where I can do something, close enough to being graphic arts to do a tarot deck. I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, but it may be that I end up just working with someone and producing a tarot deck that way. I don't want to say yet. But I would love to. I really would love to.
Absolutely. I know that thousands of people have their ear to the ground. I'm sure on any updates, but certainly I join Sorcerer's Homie as well in that. And as well, in fact, Susie, this leads to something that you touch on in the book, just about the many different decks out there and using different decks. And to that point, we have a listener question for you from a patron, Frank Robinson. And Frank is asking and saying, my question for Susan is, I work with 2 decks primarily, although one deck is more of an oracle deck as opposed to strictly a tarot deck. Mostly, I pick just one for a reading, and I use that same deck for any follow-up questions if there are any. Sometimes, however, and he says, but sometimes I do a reading with one deck, and then I do the same reading again using the other deck, the aim not being to try and get a different answer, but it gets a different perspective or more understandable reading. And Frank says, mostly this works well for me, but other times the readings seem completely different and even totally opposing. And so Frank is asking Susie, why does this happen? Is it simply due to me misinterpreting the cards, or is something else at play here? Thank you so much in advance for any input.
That's so interesting, isn't it? You know, I am a huge fan of, using the decks that you love. And I also like to collect decks like every tarot reader. So I try to change decks every 10 days so that they all get a chance. But yeah, and by all means, use an oracle deck as well as a tarot deck. Why not? Now, one of the things I've noticed, though, is that, sometimes when we look at cards that appear to have a contradictory message, it's only contradictory on the surface, right? And I actually, when I saw this question, I decided to go in my famous spreadsheet and and figure out whether I've ever drawn 2 cards that were, wildly contradictory. So I went into the spreadsheet and I thought, okay, what are 2 really opposite cards? And I thought, well, like the 9 of Cups, which is, the guy who it's literally known as the Lord of Happiness, this guy. And the 3 of Swords, which is, literally known as the Lord of Sorrow. There aren't really 2 cards that could be much more different, right? In terms of their sort of base meanings. So I said, okay, when did I draw these both and what happened? And because I have, obviously extensive tracking, I did find that I had drawn them once. It was on June 30th, 2022. And that was just last year. And what I discovered, first of all, was that one of the things that happened was that it was my daughter's birthday. So 9 of Cups, very much, I sometimes call it the wishing on the birthday cake card. So that made sense to me. I went swimming with her, which also made sense because this is associated with just Pisces, middle Jupiter and Pisces, middle decan of Pisces. Let's see. And let's see. Oh, and I did this experiment where I was conversing with my own dream maker, which was like this whole thing. Which is a Pisces thing. It's a moon related thing. The moon is Pisces and tarot, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of my own personal correspondences are very astrological that way. So all of this to me seemed very 9 of Cups. But the 3 of Swords, the 3 of Swords did show up that day in the form of 3 things. One was that I had a disgruntled customer I had to deal with. And, like it or not, I just had to deal with the transaction and, refund or make it right in one way or another. So that seemed appropriate. I did 3 readings because tarot sometimes just likes to count, right? And they were, readings of a certain quality. And then the other thing was that I got a parking ticket. So, it was both. It was both. Now, I don't know what Frank's questions were that he got the opposing information for, but, these cards each are surrounded by, I can't remember who it is who calls it the diffuse cloud of cognition. I forget. It might be Jung. I don't know. Anyway, but, they have a vast array of meanings, everything from the wildly optimistic to the deeply distressed. And if you kind of put them together, you can find parts of them that are more compatible with each other. Like for me, these two cards, they could both be terrific in the sense that, like, the Three of Swords, sometimes I sign book contracts when I do that, and that might be the thing I want most in the world. It could be terrible in that, like, I ate too much and now I'm paying the price. So there is probably a way to interpret your cards so that they are compatible. And the thing I always say is that the cards are always right. The cards are always right. It's only the interpreter who is missing the point in some way, which is not to, not to call out Frank in any way, but to say that they are trying to tell you something. And, I think the only thing we can do is sort of expand the world of possibility around these cards till we see what it is.
Yes. And I've totally been in Frank's position as well, where sometimes I'm scratching my head wondering, and then you're right. It's about just taking a step back and as you say, just kind of, approaching it, thinking about, for me, am I asking the right question? All of those things kind of tie in. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I love about, and with many other things too, your book, is that it really empowers and it teaches you to really create your own system of correspondences. And I think this leads wonderfully, Susie, to the next question. And the first part's in all caps, so I am going to yell this, but it is from the wonderful listener and patron, Trey Henry. And Trey is saying,
Henry,
quote, T. Susan Chang, I'm your biggest fan. Trey says, read this in a scary and menacing way, i.e. misery. Trey, all I can say is I tried and I'm sorry. But Trey is, as I am, a huge fan. And Trey is asking and saying, I'm interested, Susie, in the use of divination systems, not just for read operations, but also write operations, to use very
way to put that.
Yeah, very programmery terms, as Trey says. And Trey's saying, if divination, Susie, is a way of peeking into, quote, patterns of fate, how might we use divination to magically alter those patterns through those same systems? I know you've discussed sympathetic magical remediation to drawing difficult cards in the past, but Trey says, I'm curious if you can speak to this topic more broadly. Is this something that you cover in the latest book?
Absolutely. Now, I think that the one thing that we all could be doing so much more often, and if you have an intimate relationship with the cards, you can do this, is rather than always drawing randomly, you can choose deliberately. You can take the card and you can say, I'm going to work with you and we're going to come to terms. We are going to have a relationship and figure this thing out. And that, to me, is magic, right? That is the essence of magic. And one of the things that I, kind of encourage people to do is to, start by saying, okay, I want to work with the Nine of Cups. All right. I like that card. I'm going to do something with it and I'm going to turn it into a talisman for myself, which I did. I don't have it on me right now, but it was, I created this like bracelet of 9 links with one of the cups from each one of the each of the cups of the picture. I separated them out, photoshopped them, colored them, put sigils in them, did magic on them when Jupiter was in Pisces on a Thursday. I did like the whole thing. And to me, that was like, a statement about the fact that, when you work with tarot, when you work with magic, you are a co-creator in meaning, right? You get to decide what these things mean and you get to bring them into your life. And if nothing else, you have a beautiful, pretty piece of jewelry to look at afterwards, But I honestly think that everything we do as creators is magical. And I think that, anything you can do to use tarot in a magical way, which I, kind of suggest people do in chapter 8, is going to just amplify the amount of meaning that you can create in your life.
That is Listeners, I hope you appreciate that as much as I do, because Susie's dropping so many amazing hints there, and really things about developing meaning, relationship. I love that quote that you just said, which is, the essence of magic is really about that relationship and cultivating that meaning. The astrological timing, that is just so wonderful. So many great things. I know and I hope the listeners can keep in mind. And Trey, I'm not going to yell these other questions because I'm horrible at it. And you didn't tell me to, Trey, so I won't. But Trey has a few more questions for you. One, Susie, is what is your favorite tarot layout that most people don't know about, but they should?
This is very, very simple. Okay. So this is what I call the problem solution spread. And I teach it in lots of different places, but basically we start with magic. We start with like choosing the card that's going to represent the problem. Like, suppose you are, really short on cash. So you might choose this card to represent your problem. And then you take the rest of the deck and you shuffle it and you say, what's the answer? What's the solution? And, what I actually ask people to do when you're drawing a card like that, when you're looking for an answer, is actually imagine the perfect outcome. You imagine you don't have to imagine yourself as a billionaire, but you can imagine yourself as like just being comfortable and not worrying about money and just living your life and being comfortable. Right. And the advantage of doing this, putting yourself in the feeling state and like saturating yourself in the affect, is that it like shuts off all of those doubtful parts of your brain that are like, am I shuffling right? Did I drop a card? Is this really the right card? Kind of a thing. Because you're so busy imagining what it's like, to actually be in the end state. And the other thing is that I believe that like putting yourself in that frame of mind kind of attracts the right card to you. It's sort of like tarot's like hunting until it finds something that matches. So that I think problem solution spread is fantastic. It might be for like you have writer's block and you use this card, to the Eight of Swords to represent your writer's block, and then you just randomly draw a card and see what tarot has to say. I think that everybody should do this all the time.
What a lovely way. And just like you say, most people might not know about it, but they just have that. I think it's
so obvious, right? It's just so simple, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so Trey is asking another great question, which is, and again, when I was literally writing in your book, you challenge, you're like, hey, think about the kind of opposite meanings of the cards. But Trey is asking, Susie, what is one tarot card that you think is the most misunderstood of all of them?
Yeah. So a lot of people would probably say the devil, but I'm not actually going to use the devil because I think he has lots of advocates and defenders and he doesn't need me. But, the one that I want to talk about is the Seven of Swords, because I love this card. I love the sword suit generally, which makes me different. but I love the seven. I love the eight. I think they're really fantastically interesting cards. And part of my affection for this card is astrological because it's, the moon in the third decan of Aquarius. That's where my moon is. I have that kind of dignity in my chart. But I love people don't like this card because they think that he's dishonest or that he's sneaky or that it shows somebody doing something that they shouldn't be doing. I like this guy. I think that he's resourceful. I think that he's got multiple agendas going at the same time. I think that he's, he might fall sometimes. He might drop some swords sometimes. He might slip on a banana peel every once in a while, but he's got plans. And I love that about him. I sometimes call him like Odysseus, the Odysseus card, because one of the epithets for Odysseus, of course, is Polytropos, the man of many ways. Right. And you can see this guy's like twisty, he's like as I use this quote in 36 Secrets, Loki's brain is a bag of cats. That's what I see in this. Right. And I love that about him. I also love the fact that he's got these sort of animal skin boots and hat, which give him kind of the affect of a shamanic practitioner, somebody who crosses between realms and can do two things at once, existing in two places at once. He reminds me of people who can say one thing and do another, which of course is liars, but also diplomats, politicians. I mean, I think that, sort of what we do in tarot can be said to be the art of true lies, because it's metaphor, right? We're reading metaphor, and metaphor is not journalism. It's not fact. It is a form of fiction, but it's a form of true fiction. And so yeah, I really love this guy, and I would like more people to understand him.
I love that. See, this is what I mean. This is exactly like you're totally like renovating the kind of architecture that I think exists for a lot of people in the back of their minds when they get into tarot. And you're just saying, hey, look at it from a new angle. Look at it from a new perspective. It's great. And by the way, yes, if the Greeks were scratching their heads on the shores of Troy, I know that character Odysseus would absolutely be, plotting. Let's see, how can we do this? Or how do I get out of this cyclopean event? Or, whatever's happening.
That's right. Yeah.
That is so lovely, Susie. And Trey is asking, speaking of switching things up and kind of looking at either new decks or new approaches, Trey is asking, do you, Susie, ever use playing cards, i.e. a 52 card poker deck for divination? And if so, what system do you use?
So I have only used, I have done that, but only when I wasn't packing. When I didn't have my own tarot deck with me, I would and somebody had a divination emergency, which is a thing that exists. I would, just use whatever was around, which was a playing card deck. Now, system wise, because I'm a tarot reader, and you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. When I read playing cards, I read them in a tarot way, right? I will say, oh, look, it's the 5 of clubs. That's the same as the 5 of pentacles. So, I'm not proud, but I'm getting too old to learn a whole other system. However, they exist. I remember I've used this book in Fortune's Wheelhouse a bunch. This is called Fortune Telling Using Playing Cards by Jonathan D. And the interesting thing is that you can actually, reading this book, you can see a through line between some of the meanings in traditional tarot and some of the meanings in playing card lore. And also, if you kind of go back to Eteya, who had a very cartomantic way of reading tarot, you can see some similarities there. So, ultimately, I think that there is no wrong system. I think that, because it's a conversation and a relationship, you're going to have a slightly different vocabulary in every deck and, in every system and every reader, and yet somehow we can communicate. So, it might be like I'm using a playing card deck and the deck is like you're speaking pigeon, pigeon playing card. And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is the best I can do. I learned it on Duolingo. I'm sorry.
But you know what? That feeds right into the themes of your book, which is, sometimes you might be in a situation, you might have your own situation going on in life that all of a sudden you need to do a quick reading on. Maybe you're in a situation where, maybe, my cards are at home, but I'm out and someone has a deck, right? And so it's about that malleability. Would that be somewhat fair? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The ability to speak in metaphor, right? Yeah. Because honestly, I believe that, even if you don't have a tarot deck or you don't have any system based on number, you don't have your I Ching sticks, you don't have your charts, you don't have your geomancy, you don't have your stones. If you don't have stones, I mean, God help you. I mean, you really have nothing. But I honestly think that you should be able to do divination with anything. I have had an experience once where I was sitting in the woods wishing my son would call me, and all I had was sticks and leaves, right? And I'm sitting there on a rock with sticks and leaves, and I'm like, this is my son. This is me. This is him calling me, kind of thing. And, and 4 hours later he called. So, I'm just saying that, these things are about, the human ability to create symbol and meaning and to work with them in ways that affect the environment, whether or not you have a deck or not.
That is such a profound point, especially when it comes to the human meaning and how we're deriving that. And actually, I think this leads into Trey's last question, and this opens up. I mean, this could be a whole other podcast in and of itself about artificial intelligence and machine learning and everything. But Trey is asking Susie on an off-topic but in the news question. What are your thoughts on machine-generated text and images in relation to tarot or divination more broadly? There's a growing number of machine-generated texts that are hitting the market on Kickstarter, et cetera. Is any thoughts on that regarding machine-generated texts?
Yeah, I think it's really a complex question. I mean, I am a user of text to image generation. I use Midjourney all the time. I even had my writing students play with it in at Smith College this last semester. I think it's really interesting. And I completely understand the discomfort people feel with it and the rage on the part of the artists who feel like their work is being co-opted. I would feel like that too if I were an artist, and I completely understand that. So, I think it's really complex. I do think that there's something democratizing about it, the ability to sort of, I was just listening to a podcast on this today, the ability to sort of help somebody who does not have the skills produce something that's better than they could. So as I said, I play with it all the time. I talk to, on Twitter, the Arturo, who goes by Oracle of Delphi, who does these beautiful images of like mansions of the moon and different decans. And so, I've sometimes talked to him about collaborating. He does wonderful work. But right now, I'm actually using Midjourney myself to create composite collages of decanic images based on my poems for each decan, which is, I do a decan project every year, and this is my project this year. So, I'm agnostic about like the ethics of it, because I feel like, as human beings, that's our responsibility to figure out the ethical structure. I don't think the AI itself is inherently evil. I just think it's something that we have to respect its power and do our best to design a morally acceptable world around it.
Yes. That's such a great point. The something that you touch on in the book, you have these kind of AI ethicists and kind of people who are looking at the best ways to have the guardrails, but also not to completely discard it and be suspicious of it, but to safely, but also just, as you say, and just have that as a beautiful tool to augment what's already latent in the artist or the reader.
And another thing about AI that's really interesting is that, I think that there's something very much like the collective unconscious about AI, because, one of the definitions of what Jung says about, reality is that, the way he explains a causality. So like, a synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence that is acausal. It's not point A to point B. One of the ways he has people think about acausality is like, not how does one thing cause another, but what tends to go together. So, right, with AI, very often what it's producing is a melange of things that tend to go together, right? And that's why it's not strictly accurate a lot of the time, but it is, very good at producing a vibe.
That's such a great point. Gosh, we could, there's so many angles to this, but you're right. Like I remember some people would question, well, how did this AI program come up with this specific image? And then exactly, it goes back to, well, what were the original training protocols on the AI? How much learning, quote unquote, did it do from this specific subset of this section of information? And then it generates this specific thing, but it's based on, as you say, that kind of latent learning and area
Yeah. What kinds of images, what kinds of angles, what kinds of textures seem to go together in this context? Yeah,
exactly. Oh, that is fascinating. Well, That's certainly something I know we'll be seeing more of in the coming months and years as well.
No doubt.
Yes. And, as well, Susie, you've been kind of weaving throughout this chat, and you detail in your book all about the best ways to be practical with tarot and how to have daily, and you mentioned a card of the day, for example. And so we have a listener question for you from Alex Kaysen. And Alex is asking and saying, hey there, Alex and Susan. My question for Susan is, do you incorporate your deck into a daily practice of any sort?
Oh, I absolutely do. It is my core practice every day. Actually, the first thing I do every day, and it used to be I tried really hard to do it during the first planetary hour of the day, but I'm sorry, man, I just can't do it. I'm a night owl. I cannot get up at sunrise every day. So only at some times of the year. But I figure, all right, the first hour that I am awake is the best I can do here. So I do a 30-minute ritual every single day. And it is a sort of a mix of planetary devotion. That's where I start. And then and then ancestral, reverence is probably an exaggeration. I'm sure the ancestors don't think I'm terribly reverent, but I do have a relationship with them, and I talk to them every day. And in the middle of all that is the card draw. So in the middle of all that, it's sort of like right after I have done my planetary devotions, I draw a couple of cards, I leave them face down. I talk to the ancestors for a while, mostly complaining. And then after that, and I say the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which I think should be the Pledge of Allegiance for occultists. I like the Newton translation very much. So I use that because it is, I think, a statement about metaphor and a statement about the relationship between myself and the world and meaning. And then, and at the end of all that, I turn the cards over and I write a spell. So, yeah. So, and that's an every single day practice, which for me, I literally feel like a completely, I guess, not different person, but a functional person when I walk out of there. Like some people, it's coffee. For me, it's ritual. I go in there and I assemble a working self for the day. And there are many times that I go in there and I am just like, I'm a mess. And then when I come out, I know what I'm going to try to do. And even if it doesn't happen, I know that at least having a direction, keeps me from getting motion sick.
That is so great. And does this spell, this just popped into my head. So when you're writing the spell, Susie, is it a prescriptive spell? Is it kind of James Joycean like stream of consciousness integrated with the meanings, or what is that spell? And then how do you use it?
Yeah, it could be a number of different ways. Sometimes I look at my day and I kind of try and draw a connection between the day and what I know is going to happen in the day and what the meaning I perceive in the cards. Sometimes I look at the cards and I look at the symbolism and I try and write a spell based on that. Sometimes I use the esoterics. Sometimes I'll use the astrology as keywords. Sometimes I'll use Hebrew letter meanings as keywords. I like to make them rhyme so I can remember them in my head afterwards. I'll tell you what I did today. Today I drew these two cards, the Death card and the Knight of Swords reversed. And this is from, you can see it's a Rider-Waite Smith style deck, but it is actually the Sawyer Redux Tarot by Jamie Sawyer. She's a wonderful, wonderful artist who does tarot decks, and she's a tattoo artist also, and she kind of reconceptualized these cards. So the first thing I noticed on these cards was that they both have white horses on them, right? Death on his white horse, and then the Knight of Swords on his whitish, grayish horse, and because the Knight of Swords is reversed, they're both going in the same direction. They're both, I guess, traveling to the right, which I interpret as the future. So I wrote this spell that said, I wanted the horses and the riders in there. And I said, before the rider, capital R, before the rider, all must yield. Attention is the blade I wield. So attention I have this whole like belief that the Ace of Swords is the blade of attention. Like where you look is, both cuts away and preserves at the same time. And so I was thinking about the Knight of Swords as carrying the Ace of Swords. And also, I knew that I would be in the car a bunch today, so I kind of wanted to, before the writer almost yield, I kind of wanted to have a hassle-free day in the car.
Yeah.
That's kind of part of it. My daughter had to take an AP test, and attention is the blade I wield had something to do with that as well. So, I just kind of like, kind of like take all the meanings and kind of distill it down to the ones that I'm interested in for the day. And hopefully that will have some traction when it gets sent out there into the ether.
Okay, I really hope the listeners appreciate that as much as I did, because that was a crash course, awesome example of someone who is an expert tarot reader who has a deep relationship with meaning, a lifelong relationship. I think that is just, thank you for sharing that, Susie. That was just so wonderful. Yes, that was so excellent. And I know, Susie, we definitely want to chat a little bit about, of course, your amazing online courses, your projects and everything. And we have one after show question, but we do have for the main podcast, one last listener question for you.
Okay.
And this is from Han. And Han is asking and saying, quote, "Oh man, I am so excited for the chance to ask T. Susan Chang a question. Normally," Han says, "I am much more of a hermit, but she is my primary go-to and I want to delve deeper into the cards. So I would be remiss if I didn't at least say, thank you, T. Susan Chang, for all you've contributed." And Han saying, "Do you think there are ways, Susie, that tarot can be fleshed out or evolved? I've been increasingly thinking about how tarot might be better served as an adaptive form of divination, but it seems the system is very prescriptive. I'm not talking about intuitive reading, as I think the magical patterning of tarot is very valuable, but," Han says, "can we expand on that pattern? And if yes, how so?"
Yeah. So I seized on that word prescriptive because I think that that's really interesting. And I think it is possible, I can understand why Han perceives the system as prescriptive, because so much of what we receive in the tradition is, there are books that tell you how you should do this and how you should do that. And, and I really am trying to push back against that really hard with what I do. One of the first things that I talk about in the beginning of the book is like, some people think that is prediction versus prescription. Like prediction, is the idea that, of course, that you can find out what is going on from your cards. And prescription is that the idea that they give you advice, that they tell you what to do, what you ought to do, which of course is its own whole like ball of wax. But I like to say that, maybe the better way to think about a tarot reading is that it's an invitation, it's not prediction completely. It's not prescription completely. It's an invitation to enter into a sort of a game, to enter. It's a hermetic art. It's an art of games where you look at the card and you say, well, what are the things this could be? What is the potential of this? What is how can I expand out the possibilities in here? And how can I win also? Right? It is a game ultimately. So, and like all games, some you win and some you lose, and you care about it a lot when you're playing, but afterwards you let it go, does not matter. Let it be. Does not matter, need not be, correct? Yes. In chaos magic, you just let it go. Yeah.
Ah, yeah. That is so great. I mean, it really, correct me if I'm wrong, Susie, it kind of fits in with the theme, the overarching theme of your book, which, as you said, for instance, couple moments ago, you were saying we should all gently put to bed this should word, what should I do? And there's this petrified, concretized kind of assumptions that pre-assumption, things that we bring into a deck. And I think what you're saying here is like, don't, of course, definitely, learn the tradition, learn the traditional
Mhm.
correspondences. But when it comes to you and your life, it's about what is that idiosyncratic personal relationship that you have with the cards?
Yeah.
Would that be
Yeah.
fair?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, the tarot is you, right? That's the thing about it that's so amazing. It's like if the tarot is you and you lay it out there, every part of you is there. Every part of you is valuable. Every part of you is worth studying and getting to know better. And that's why I say that when you shuffle the cards in the morning and you draw a card, that is an incredible act of courage because you're holding the entire world, your entire perceived world in your hands, and you're saying, I will take any of it. Whatever you can give me, I will take it. I will do my best. I will, whatever the result is, whatever you're offering me, I will recognize that there's a better way and a worse way to handle it, and I will choose the better way. So,
That is wonderful. And it really, I listeners, please check out the podcast and video descriptions below, because if you're really interested in developing a relationship with the cards and appreciating them in your own specific individual circumstance, you definitely have to check that out. And Susie, before we get to your projects and again, you not sleeping and doing everything, um, could one of the questions that I love asking experts like you is kind of a broad one, but it's, you know, when it comes to misconceptions that people have about tarot, obviously your previous books and the Living Tarot really are cutting through the misconceptions. But if there's two or three misconceptions that we haven't discussed yet that people are listening and they may have in the back of their mind, what are those, and how should people maybe
yeah.
think about them differently?
Yeah. So, well, just to sort of, I'll touch on some that we've sort of mentioned, like memorization is one. Of course, I don't think people need to memorize. I think that you don't memorize your life and you don't need to memorize tarot either. You just find your life in the cards. The second one, I think, would have to do with something I read just yesterday. Somebody posted on the Fortune's Wheelhouse Academy group this wonderful article about Sting. And Sting said, I used to do tarot readings until they got too scary. And I hear that a lot from people, right? I hear that a lot from people that like, oh, I started, but I was just kind of freaked out or I was spooked out. I found it too spooky. It was too scarily right on target. I mean, what are we doing this for if not, so so I think that like synchronicity is only scary if you don't believe that you live in a living universe that observes you and speaks back to you. I mean, that's not scary. That's why shouldn't you live in a living universe, right? Who wants to live in a, dead, material causal one, everything is just particles banging into each other from the Big Bang until the end, right? Who wants to live in that deterministic universe? So I don't think it's scary at all. It's the world is more alive than you think, and if that's scary, well, I don't know. I think that's kind of great, actually. So, and if people are seeing things that are dark in the cards, well, that is, I think that it's understandable that you might be scared. I think that, some people are more psychically sensitive than other people. And I think we all have to be kind to ourselves as well. But I also think that tarot itself offers a tool for finding what is the remedy for that. I mean, tarot has everything in it, so the poison and the remedy. So if you're seeing only darkness, look harder in tarot and you'll see the light as well. And then the third thing is that magic again, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I do want to emphasize that with tarot, it's not just about divination. It's not just about fate. It's not just about the things that might happen. It's about what you can do about it. People always think that they don't want to read tarot because it's too fatalistic. And what does that even mean, right? I believe that, in my understanding of the way things work, I believe, and I've said this before, that it is constructive to use your illusion of free will to deal with your illusion of fate. And I believe that we can use the cards in just that way to say that the meaning that I perceive in you is something that I offer up. I have this, and I may have talked about this before with you. I don't remember if I have, but I have this sort of thing I say during my rituals, something I received in a dream, which is within results are differences, and differences are offerings, and offerings are results. So the idea is that the results that you receive when you draw are random, and they're differences. Within results are differences of interpretation. But my difference of interpretation is something I offer up. Differences are offerings. And then I offer it up, and offerings are results. They come back to me in the form of what I asked for, right? So it's a cyclical statement. Within results are differences are offerings, and offerings are results. And to me, that is a magical sort of like water cycle, right? Where everything is contained in the same universe, and that you recognize that your perspective is a magical agent within that universe.
It's beautiful. It's like a benign Ouroboros, just like this,
Yes.
this positive cycle that's just kind of there. And
right. And it's no more real than anything else, right? People sometimes get upset that they're looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, but you're always looking through some kind of filter, right? So it's constructive to use that illusion to deal with your illusion of fate.
Oh, that is so great. So yes, so for everyone out there who's worried, as Sting was, that it's becoming too fatalistic, too pragmatic, too like, oh my gosh, this is real. It's shattering that illusion of this kind of petrified fate, and you're just discovering it instead of participating in it with the relationship with the cards. That is, oh, that's so beautiful, Susie. Well, so Susie, in addition to the Living Tarot, can you please share with the listeners? I know many are familiar, but again, this goes back to the non-sleeping aspects that you bring always. But can you tell us about, for everyone who is checking out the Living Tarot, tell us about your ongoing online courses, your books, your website. How can people support you? How can they check it all out?
Okay. Well, let's talk about classes first. So the Living Tarot is a book, but it's also a class. The difference between the class and the book is that in the class, the online class, you get feedback from me, obviously. There's a monthly Zoom meeting. And if you graduate, if and only if you graduate, you get a 1-question reading with me. So it is an incredible deal. And if you bought the Living Tarot, you can send me the receipt and get the price of the book off the price of the course. So there's a whole mechanism for doing that on my website, which is tsusanchang.com. Now, the other courses that are going on right now, I'm teaching one for Atlas Obscura, which is a big context course into tarot. Starts with origins, goes through major and minor arcana, talks about reality, talks about stories, and then sort of does a little bit of praxis as well. So that runs in May and October. I'm in the middle of the May one right now. Then let's see, in the fall, I've got Jung Platform. I'm doing something for Jung Platform, the big platform thing. And that's going to be a more Jungian based praxis course. And then in January, I've got, I'm doing a 4-week one for Jung Society of Washington. I think that's a 4-weeker. And then, of course, I do nothing in the spring because I teach writing at the local college, at Smith College, and that is not open to the rest of the world. But during the entire year, I'm doing presentations. I'm going to different tarot conferences. I'm usually available selling books or signing books or giving talks or whatever. And then, let's see, I'm always available for readings and mentorship. That's also on my website. And books, there are now 4 tarot books and 1 non-tarot book. Besides the Living Tarot, we've got Tarot Deciphered, which is the big red book, the doorstop that's based on Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast. We've got 36 Secrets, which is my book on the minors, which I call the small one. And then there's Tarot Correspondences, which is the 777 of tarot. So I call them the red one, the blue one, the small one, and the new one. So there's that. And there's also, like, for those who really love food, there's my original book from 2011 called A Spoonful of Promises, which is a whole memoir thing, but not your audience mostly. And then, like, in terms of things I make, I've got like the Etsy shop, which is www.etsy.com/shop/tarotista, where I make, tarot cases out of silk and brocade, and I make perfumes, custom perfumes, astrological perfumes and zodiacal perfumes. I have a Redbubble shop where I make, where I just make random stuff once in a while, like this fantastic Nine of Swords blanket, which I use for just like when I want to curl up and read a book.
Wow.
Or when I'm feeling really anxious. So I just do those once in a while. And that's redbubble.com/people/tarotista/shop. So I think that's most of it. Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast is ongoing. We don't do new episodes, but we keep it out there because, it still gets a good 2,000 downloads a week, and people really want to re-listen to episodes because there's a ton of information in there. In fact, I listen to it because I can't remember all the shit we said on the show. So yeah, and I think that might be it.
That is lovely. And listeners, for all of those, please check the podcast and video descriptions for all of the menagerie of ways that you can support Susie, which is just so lovely. Susie, I know we have an after show question where we're going to get into some ancient Greek, but as we wrap up this main podcast, are there any parting words that you have, or anything that we haven't discussed, or anything about the Living Tarot, things you want listeners to keep in mind, anything at all?
I think I just want to make sure that people know that tarot is for them. Just go ahead and see what happens. Live with tarot, draw cards, see what happens. Tarot will teach you. There's no reason to be intimidated or afraid. Tarot will teach you itself. You just be patient and keep your eyes open.
That is so lovely. What critics say of the poet Emily Dickinson, that she has a unique cognitive music, I think we can say that there's a unique cognitive music in what you do, Susie, every single day. And frankly, with your writings and your courses and your posts, it is such an honor. I mean, how can we even start? Certified professional tarot reader, author, teacher, artist, creator, T. Susan Chang. Susie, just thank you so much just for taking the time and sharing your time and your wisdom on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Alex. You are a gem, and your podcast is a treasure. Thank you so much.